Our next guest is the New York Times bestselling author of 18 books, including The Invisible Girl. Though she initially wrote more contemporary women's fiction, she has since become one of the most sought after writers on the thriller scene. And today, she's coming to us all the way from her home in London. Lisa Jewell, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Hi, hello, lovely to see you.
It's fabulous to have you on. Now, Lisa, we chatted just before the interview about your background in fashion. And I'd love to hear about that kind of work. And did you always have the impulse to write? And what made you take the plunge finally?
Yeah, I feel a bit weird saying that I used to work in fashion and I'm sitting here in like a 10-pound black polo neck. My life I've never had a grand master plan. I wasn't setting off in any particular direction. I wanted to be a music journalist as a teenager. And then I ended up going to the same college as all my friends because I didn't know what I wanted. I certainly had no idea how you became a music journalist. And they were going off to do this weird course called fashion promotion and communication. And I thought, oh, well, I'll just do that. Then I can stay with my friends. And that didn't really teach me much about anything. But what it did was it got me a low-level, entry-level job in the fashion industry in London. So I worked for a while as a pattern room assistant at a company called Warehouse. And I worked my way up from that to being the PR assistant. And there I was at the age of 21 or whatever, working in the fashion industry, thinking that was going to be me. I thought, well, there you go, that's me then. I'm going to be a fashion person for whatever reason. And then I just had this life-changing conversation with a friend when I was about 26 about what I really wanted to do. And I told her that I thought what I really wanted to do was write a novel, which seemed like a completely audacious, ridiculous thing for a 26-year-old, like, flibberty-gibbet Londoner to say. But she encouraged me. She just said, you should just do it. If that's what you want to do, you should just do it. She said, write 3 chapters and see where that takes you. And she said, if you do that, I'll take you out for dinner to your favorite restaurant. So I did it, and we made a bet, and we actually shook hands and everything. And I wrote those 3 chapters, and she told me to send them to some agents. And so I sent them to some agents, and then I got a publishing deal. And that was back in the mid-90s, and here we are. 2020 even, and 18 books later, and yeah, that sort of, it's hard for me to imagine that I was ever working in the fashion industry.
So you literally sold on a book on 3 chapters only?
No,
Okay.
I don't want anyone out there who's starting to write a book to get the wrong impression. No, I sent those 3 chapters out to many agents, most of whom rejected it, but one of them said that she would like to see the rest.
Okay.
At which point I thought, okay, I'm going to have to change my whole life over now because an agent wants to see my book that I haven't written. and yes, so then I set about writing the book that I hadn't written. So it's actually cheating to start submitting work to agents when you haven't finished a book. But I did it. It was such a light-hearted throwaway thing. It wasn't supposed to be a big life-changing thing. I didn't realize while it was happening that my whole destiny was hinging on this conversation and on this moment and on these 3 chapters. But yeah, no, I did write the full book before I got an agent and a deal.
But still, it's pretty fantastic that you sold your very first novel. Congrats. That's very
It is, absolutely. Very, very lucky I was at the time, very fortunate.
Lisa, you mentioned that your first book came out in the 90s. I wonder, how has publishing changed since then?
I know that publishing has changed, and this is going to make me sound like a dinosaur, because I'm aware of the fact that it's very different, and certainly for people coming to the publishing industry now as young writers, as debut writers, it's a completely different landscape. But for me, I got plugged into publishing I signed my first contract in 1998. And for me, it's still the same. I still have to write a book every year. I still sign contracts every couple of books. I still write on a home computer or a laptop now. The first one was written on a home computer, but now laptops. I've still got an editor. I've still got an agent. Ebooks happened, obviously, during the time that I've been a published writer. There were no ebooks, and now there are ebooks. But again, that doesn't impact on me or the way I write or the way my professional existence. So yes, publishing has changed, but not. It's still 1998 for me in many, many ways. Yeah. So there you go. I'm a publishing dinosaur.
Yeah, well, I guess with respect to, the ebooks, the surge of ebooks, you've probably seen a difference in your sales, right? I'm assuming when you first started, it was a lot more print. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, what happened was, I seem to recall, is that when ebooks exploded, the publishing industry and everyone involved in the publishing industry thought, that's it. The print book is now going to be dead. That's it. We're all going to have to like get used to this new world of ebooks. Everybody's going to be reading on Kindles. Nobody's going to be buying books. Bookshops are going to shut. And didn't take very long for that first explosion to just sort of dwindle away and just become a sort of background hum, and putting print books back in the spot. I still sell many more print books than I sell ebooks, probably 3 or 4 times as many print books as I sell ebooks. So it just never became quite the thing that we all thought it was going to become when it first started. So yeah, no, print books, I think still most people prefer to pick up a.
Now audiobooks are really popular.
There you go.
And now the audiobooks are such a fast rising format within the
How weird is that? I didn't even used to have any awareness of the audiobook work that was going on in the background of my career. There would be people in studios bringing in actors, recording my books, designing, the packaging for it, and off it would go, and it would sell a few hundred, and I didn't hear anything about it. I didn't get any royalties for it. And suddenly it's just this massive, massive part of my income. It's a massive, massive part of the publishing industry's income. And particularly over the pandemic, over what we call lockdown, you call quarantine, audio's gone even bigger. I mean, and now it's actual proper famous actors are doing the recordings for audiobooks these days, and it's turned into quite a hot ticket to get a good audiobook. So yeah, that's a really unexpected and incredible development that sort of came from nowhere.
Yeah, Ryan often listens to one before he goes to sleep, and I love listening to audiobooks when I drive or go for a nice long walk. So
Yeah.
Lisa, can you kindly walk us through your writing process and how an average day would look?
Yeah, God, I miss average days. It's been a long time since there was an average day. So pre-lockdown, let's talk pre-lockdown, because one day will be post-lockdown, and then that's how I'll be writing again. So I like to clear my to-do list before I start writing. So I've got 2 teenagers, get them out the house in the mornings, get my emails done, get any sort of little bits of Q&As for blogs and what have you done, get my housework done, walk the dog, have something to eat, go to the shops, get everything done so that my decks are clear. And then I will either sit at my kitchen table or in a coffee shop and work for 3 hours maximum, somewhere between 2 and 3 hours, and write 1,000 words. So that's how my day looks when things are normal. And in that 1,000 words, I write in a very chronological, lateral way. I just look at what I wrote the day before, read through it to remind myself where I was heading with it, and then just hit the ground running, write another 1,000 words. And I try and keep doing that without going backwards, and just keep building up those layers and layers and layers and layers until the happy day when I can type in the end. And I don't plot and I don't plan, so everything that ends up on the page has come directly from here and onto the keyboard, with no interim stage of making notes or like whiteboards or anything like that. So it's just a sort of, it's quite it sounds quite mechanical, and in a lot of ways it is quite mechanical, because I'm so focused on writing words that all the other stuff that happens, that the reader reads the book and goes, wow, how did she do that? And that, look at that amazing bit of plotting. I don't even feel that happening at the time, because all I'm focusing on is, I'm nearly at 1,000 words. I just need to write another 100 words and I'm there. So yeah, that's how I write. I'm very business-like.
I actually, you're right around because I really love the fact that you have that goal of 1,000 words, which seems like a manageable chunk, like a scene, and the fact that you are very organic and sort of just working as you go as ideas come up. Have you tried writing more words a day and found it just too draining?
Well, come a point in the writing process when I'm coming towards the end, when I'm coming down the other side of the hill, where I will just by accident write more. But when I'm coming up the hill and it is very like words, come on, more words. I very rarely think, oh, I'd like to write some more. I generally think, okay, 2.5 hours, that's it, 1,000 words, laptop lid down, get on with the rest of my day. So I don't ever really feel the urge to keep going. And I know that some people say, oh, but then, when you're in the flow, and isn't it really awful having to stop when you're right in the middle of it? And I just think, no, it's not awful having to stop, because in fact, I think it's that stopping that gives me that time to, it's like putting the brakes on very slowly, or come up, like sort of reversing slightly away from what you've done. So you've got some objectivity. So when you come to it the next day, it's ready to go. Whereas I think if I sat there for too long and started fiddling with it and going off on tangents, this is what I tell myself anyway. I'm not sure I would have so much control over the plotting and all the stuff that I do on the page.
Lisa, as mentioned in the intro, you didn't always write thrillers. What kind of books were you writing before that, and why did you make the switch?
So my first novel, the one that I referred to earlier, the one I wrote for a bet, was actually, ironically, I had sat down and started writing it as a psychological thriller, and quickly found that that's not where my head was at. I was 27 years old. I was in a new relationship. I was like madly in love and having the time of my life. And I found that I wanted to write more about relationships. So it ended up being a romantic comedy. It was called Rouse Party. It was quite an edgy romantic comedy. It wasn't saccharine. It wasn't girly. It was, there's lots of bad language and sex and drugs and what have you in it. But it was ultimately a romantic comedy. And that did really, really well in the UK. It was a bestseller. And I became sort of seen as the sort of the queen of what was known at the time as the chick lit scene. So therefore, that's kind of who I was. That was my profile. I was Lisa Jewell, a best-selling chick lit author, which meant that I carried on writing those sorts of novels for quite some time. But then I got, I was already 30 when my first novel came out. So I was on the cusp of really coming into the next phase of my life. And that sort of came through in my writing. So I sort of just gradually kind of pulled back on the relationship stuff and pulled more into the dark stuff, which had always been there anyway. And just sort of kept testing the waters really in terms of my agent, my editor, and of course my readers. Ultimately, it had to be, whatever I was writing, it had to be stuff that my readers would want to read. But also stuff that new readers might want to read. So it was I never had a moment of like, okay, I've had enough of writing romantic comedies, I'm going to write a thriller. It was more a very gradual, incremental thing where with each book, and you can do that over 18 books, you can push things along quite slowly without anybody even really noticing you're doing it. Until I think it was like my 12th or 11th book where I killed someone. And I think that was the turning point. It was almost that sort of, okay, I've killed someone. There was a policeman. I think I've now sort of walked through the next door into the thriller genre. So it was always very gradual and natural. I never had to make a big jump or make a big decision to change my genre.
Well, welcome to the dark side.
Yes, thank you. I love it.
What I'm dying to know is which one is harder to write? The chick lit stuff or the psychological thrillers?
Such a good question. At first, I've been asked that question before, and in the early days of writing thrillers, I would say thrillers are much harder to write. But now I'm on I think this is my 6th or 7th, and I don't know if it's that I've worked out how to write thrillers, or that I'm more confident because I'm older and you grow in confidence as you get older, and I've got more faith in myself and my instincts. So it could be a combination of the both. But the last 2 novels, the last 2 thrillers, so Invisible Girl and Family Upstairs before that, I found very, I'd almost say enjoyable to write. It didn't feel so technically challenging as the first few thrillers I wrote. I felt very much more like I was in control of what was going on, and I could just follow my instincts and I would get there in the end. So yeah, I don't really know. I just think writing books is obviously, it's always difficult. But the older you get and the more books you write, I don't think you get better at it, but you get more confident, I think.
And I'm always intrigued to know what the influences are for different writers. And who did you look up to when you were, in the fashion industry looking towards writing? Who are some of your greatest influences?
Well, yeah, I didn't read. So I stopped reading books. I was a bookworm up until the age of about 13. And then from 13 to 21, I didn't read a book. Just didn't even occur to me to read a book. I was too busy doing other things. And then I found myself in this very ill-advised young marriage at the age of 21 to a man who was just bad man and bad marriage, but he was a big reader. And he just kept giving me books off his bookshelves. And, he was a guy, so they were guy books. And I think that was it was kind of partly wanting to emulate and don't ask me who they were because my mind goes blank when anybody asks me to remember any book I've ever read. So it's partly a sort of wanting to emulate the kind of books that I'd been reading off my ex-husband's bookshelves, but also this sense that the voice that was missing was a young woman's voice. So actually the book that turned me on to, rather than thinking, oh, wouldn't it be great to write a novel? I'll do that when I'm 50, which is kind of where I was at. The book that turned me on to thinking, do it now, why not do it now, was High Fidelity by Nick Hornby. I don't know if either of you read it, but I read that just before I started writing my first novel. And it certainly wasn't dark or a thriller, but it was, when you read a book and you feel like the writer's talking to you. And it was that sense of, here is a voice I recognize, here is a person who I feel like I could know in real life. So that was literally the book that made me think, don't wait till you're 50 to write a novel, start a novel now. So yes, it was lots of things feeding into it. But for a long time, Nick Hornby was my role model and my inspiration.
And if you were going on a beach holiday next week, let's dream. Which book would you like to take with you?
Oh God, I'm envisaging my reading pile, my TBR pile, which is just heaving with books that I really want to read. I know what I would take. I would take The Five, and I cannot. Do either of you know the name of the author? Oh,
yeah.
I don't know if it's a British book. Maybe it's a British book, but it's about the Jack the Ripper, who's a famous English serial killer back in the 1700s who killed prostitutes. And somebody wrote a book about all his victims, because up until this point, all it was the Jack the Ripper killed prostitutes. So what she's done is she's gone and unearthed the history of the victims of this ancient serial killer. So yes, that's the book I would take, and I wish I could remember the name of the author, but there you go.
Yeah, we'll look it up and slip it in later.
Yeah, look it up. The Five, I think it's called The Five. Yeah.
I was told by someone within your U.S. publisher that you have a rather large book collection and that you prefer the physical book over ebooks and e-readers. So one, is that true? And two, if it is true, why? Why do you prefer the physical book?
Ah, okay. Yes, so I have half as many books as I had 2 years ago. I had a cull. I got rid of 1,500 books. I gave them all to one family. But yeah, so I've still probably got about 1,500 books, and I selected the books that I was going to keep using the Marie Kondo technique of holding the book in my hand. So I had all my empty cardboard boxes for books that were going to go, and held it in my hand and thought, does this book spark joy? So if it sparked joy for whatever reason, it stayed on the shelf, and if it didn't, it went in the cardboard box. I toyed with Kindles, as we all did, and I don't know, it just didn't work for me. I think books are just beautiful. I think books are beautiful. I think they're satisfying to hold. I like to know I like to be able to look at it and see how much I've read. And so I know you can look at percentages on Kindles. I like the way they smell. I'm not the first person to say they like the way that books smell. They're like trophies. So after you've read them, you can put them on a shelf and look at them and think, I was there. I was in that book. I had that experience. Well, I don't know. I just love them. I just love books. And I'm not one of those ones, because a lot of readers oscillate, don't they, between reading on the Kindle and reading hard copies, and I don't. I only read, and that's been quite tricky during lockdown. Is all the advanced readers copies. Like, we can send it to you in PDF. Like, no, can you not send me a paper one? And they're like, we haven't got any paper ones because the prints aren't running. So yeah, that's been quite tricky because I can't read on the screen. So yeah, love books.
I have the same problem right now, by the way. Everyone is sending out the e-arts, and I just despise e-readers. I like to feel the book. I have yours right here. By the way, I found Kim and I, before this started, we were talking, and I can do a magic trick with the Invisible Girl. If I just hold it here, look at that.
That's amazing.
So no, I'm with you. I like to be able to hold the book and feel it. I always feel like when you hit that halfway point, you can feel it. It's pretty balanced, that you're about to go downhill and really get to the fun part. And as you have less pages in your hand, that anticipation builds. I don't feel that with an e-reader.
No.
The bottom will say you have X amount of pages left. I just don't think it's the same.
It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything unless you can feel it with your hands, the weight going from one side to the other as you work your way through it. It's the magic just isn't there, is it?
It's not the same.
No.
So Lisa, you write incredible standalone novels, and they always feature the most fascinating protagonists. How do you come up with that protagonist?
I genuinely have got no idea, but it is generally the people. That's when I know the book's ready to go, when I can visualize the people who are going to, be telling the story, and they just sort of can't. I really can't explain it. It's just they just show up. So, for example, in Invisible Girl. So I knew that I wanted to write about this guy called Owen, who's a loner, and he lives in his aunt's. He's 33 years old. He's a virgin. He lives in his aunt's spare bedroom. His aunt hates him. He works as a college lecturer, and he's just been suspended because 2 of his students have accused him of sexual impropriety at the Christmas party. So I knew I wanted to write about him because the working title for this book was Creep. I wanted to write about a guy that other people see as being a bit creepy. And then I knew that I needed to play him off against someone. So I thought, I don't know, I just thought it would be interesting to write about a mum, a bit like me, with teenage children. And just this woman came to me, and I could see her in my head, and I could see she was very slight and very thin, and she had quite fine hair, and she wore pink jumpers, sweaters. And so that was just Kate. She was just there. I thought, she can live across the street. So I had them, and they were playing off against each other. She thinks that he's followed her daughter home from the tube station one night, so she's got her eye on him. And then there are some sexual assaults in the area, and she reports him to the police, saying, I think you should keep an eye on this guy over the road because I think he's a bit dodgy. But then Sapphire Maddox, who is Invisible Girl, eponymous Sapphire Maddox, she didn't come to me until, so that's who was going to be telling the story. And then there's a chapter fairly early on when Kate is looking through her husband's private records. He's a child psychologist, and she's going through his private patient records for various reasons. And she comes upon the records of a young girl called Sapphire Maddox, who's being treated by her husband she's been self-harming for childhood trauma. And it was just a throwaway thing. But the minute I wrote that name down, or typed that name, Sapphire Maddox, I thought, I really want to know who Sapphire Maddox is. She sounds fascinating. And why has she been self-harming? And what happened to her when she was a child? And why has she been going to see a psychologist? And and what was her relationship like while she was having therapy with this psychologist. So that's how she came. I literally just wrote her name down on the page, and she just jumped out of the page and said, I want to be in your book. Can you write about me? And I thought, well, that would be a really interesting third point of view on this whole story, as someone who's who knows Kate's husband from that point of view. So yeah, so a very long way of saying they come from all sorts of places and in all sorts of different ways, but I can't explain how it happens.
I find them very relatable, I think, which really resonates with the reader.
Thank you. No, I do. I mean, I wouldn't enjoy writing about people who weren't essentially interesting people to know. You know, it's just like you wouldn't pursue a friendship with someone who didn't interest you, or whose company you didn't enjoy, or who wasn't fun, or who wasn't caring or edgy, or, you know, you would pursue a friendship with someone for lots of reasons. And that's how I choose the characters for my books, is the same way I would choose somebody's company, not necessarily friendship, because some of my characters are dreadful, but you'd be drawn to them in a certain way because there's something interesting. They can offer you something that other people, you know, you meet thousands of people in your lifetime and not that many end up being part of your life. So that's kind of how I choose them. So yeah, the dark arts.
Well, Lisa, what advice do you have for new writers? Other than, of course, get an agent with your first 3 chapters, don't
Yeah,
outline
yes.
it all, just sit down and write whatever you want.
That's it, yeah. I would say really important to have a thick skin. I think if you've got a thin skin, you're going to find it, you're going to stumble at the first rejection, or even just, you know, you write your first chapter and you think, oh, I've just, you've been looking forward to this experience of writing a book, and you write your first chapter and you think it's going to be this amazing experience, and you write your first chapter and think, oh, that's not very good. I think a lot of people might give up at that point because it's not lived up to their expectations. So I think having low expectations of the writing process itself, because most of writing is not fun and a lot of it is very, very difficult. And having realistic expectations of what happens once you've written a book, the fact that not everybody's going to like your book. I think, yeah, so just being really pragmatic and having a thick skin and kind of, you know, hoping for the best but expecting the worst, and just grinding through it. And you know, everybody says this as well, finishing it. Because until you finished it, there's no conversation to be had. There's, you know, you're not going anywhere. So yeah, just sort of, yeah. I'm not sure it's very helpful, but just kind of get on with it, get it done, and keep the faith, and just follow your instincts as well.
I think it's
very
a lot of people talk about wanting to write a book.
Yes.
And you actually have to do it. Right. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest step. You know, you hear from people all the time that, hey, I have this great book idea. I've always wanted to be a writer. And that's great, but you have to actually sit down and write it then.
Yes.
And
it's nowhere near as much fun as you think it would be from the outside. You know, it's just not fun. Some bits of it are quite satisfying. You do have like little bouts of writing where you think, oh, that was quite good. But most of the time it's not fun. It is just a mechanical process of choosing the right word for everything and putting them in the right order, and just making sure that you keep the momentum going. And sometimes, like I say, there are magic moments, but most of it, and I think, you know, I think you need to be prepared for that, but it's not as much fun as you might think it is. I think cheerleaders are good as well. I think a lot of people think that if you're going to write a book, you need to kind of lock yourself away in a dark room and not tell anyone. I found cheerleaders massively important when I was writing my first book. I just told everyone I was doing it. Which meant that every time I went to the pub or every time I saw friends, they'd be like, how's your book going? How's it going? And then I had that sort of impetus to keep going, because it'd be really embarrassing to turn up at the pub on Friday night and say, well, you know, I just sort of gave up actually. But yeah, it wasn't really working out for me. So having people who believed that I could do it and were encouraging me along the way really helped, put the wind beneath my wings in a lot of ways, just to believe that I could do this ridiculous thing. And it is a ridiculous thing to write a book in so many ways. So yeah, Cheerleaders are good.
I always think your friend there that encouraged you and took you for dinner when you first started. You know, I'm sure she's very proud of you, right? You know, with everything.
She literally, I was on a WhatsApp chat with her earlier on today, and she used those very words. She said, "I'm so proud of you." I can't remember what I just told her. I told her something about some good news, and she said, "I'm so proud of you." So yeah, there she is.
That's wonderful.
Still in
Now,
my life and very proud of me.
it's great to have that kind of support. One
Yeah.
thing that really impresses me about your career is that you've had massive success on both, you know, parts of like North America as well as UK, and that's sometimes unusual because a lot of, you know, American authors have a hard time translating to the British audience and vice versa. What do you think makes your book so universally loved?
Oh, that's a lovely question. Thank you. And yeah, it took me a while to break America, as they say. Um, I I'm going to have to assume. I think there's a lot of American readers just like reading British books because they like the Britishisms and they like that whole sense of you know, that sort of Anglophile thing. But I think quite beyond that, it's the characters. I'm going to assume that it's the characters, which is what you mentioned earlier, that people feel very at home with my characters and they feel that they're invested in them and that they're real. I've got like quite a few people have said to me that they finish one of my books and then they expect to see one of my characters walking down the street because it seems so real to them. So I'm going to assume that that's the thing that's crossed from the UK into the US, that sort of sense of relatability and knowability, and yeah, I assume. I don't
I
know.
agree with you. I think there's a real relatability and resonance when you
Yeah,
read because it's someone that you can kind of relate to that has, you know, flaws. And I think that's what's really appealing in general is that nobody really wants to read about perfect people. They want to read about
yeah.
interesting people, as you said.
Yes, and that's the thing. I try to avoid stereotypes, and even if I'm writing a bad character, I want the reader at least at a few junctures to think, oh, maybe they're not so bad, or oh, okay, now I understand a bit why they are the way they are. So I always try and shine lights on every aspect of the characters, or even when I'm writing a good character like the boy Josh in here. I won't say too much about Josh, but he's, you know, I write him in a certain way for the majority of the book without giving away any spoilers. But then towards the end, I give him a different complexion, shall we say. And I think that's right. I think that's fantastic when you're reading a book and you think you've got the measure of someone, and then you see a different side to them and you think, gosh, actually maybe you would be capable of that, or maybe you're not what I thought you were. And I think that's what keeps the energy when you're reading a book, is that feeling that you don't know everything.
Well, Lisa, before you go, can you tell us what you're working on right now?
Yes, I can. It is, we just officially titled it today. Ta-da! Literally, it was an email in my inbox about 2 hours ago saying this is the official title. It's called The Night She Disappeared, and it's about a young teenage couple who've got a baby, and they live in this very upmarket commuter belt village just outside London. And they go to the pub on a Friday night. It's the first time they've been out without their baby since the baby was born. So they leave the baby with the grandmother and they go to the pub, and they end up with a bunch of kids from the posh college, which is also in the village where all the rich kids go. And they're all messed up, these kids. They all come from broken families. They're all really dysfunctional. And they somehow end up in the pub on Friday night with this bunch of rich kids, and they go back to big house in the country with a swimming pool for a pool party, and they never come home. Yes, so it's just the story of missing people. It's kind of a cold case thing as well, because they've been missing for 2 years when the story starts, and then something is found in the grounds of the college, and which brings the whole case back up to the light again. So there you go, The Night She Disappeared.
Wow, that sounds fascinating.
Yes, I'm having a lot of fun writing it, actually. Touch wood, I'll continue to have fun writing it, but at the moment I'm really enjoying it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Lisa. Very interesting to learn about your process and your background. And we're really looking forward to reading the new one.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Better finish it then.
Please.
It's been lovely talking to you both. Thank you so much for having me.